I still remember the day I arrived in Manila like it was yesterday. The humid air clung to my skin as I stepped off the plane, carrying with me a mix of excitement and trepidation. As a student of folklore and mythology, I had always been fascinated by the darker side of human culture. Tagalog, horror stories in particular, had captivated me since childhood. The eerie tales of Aswang, Tikbalang, and Diwata whispered secrets of a world beyond our own. Little did I know that this city would become my playground for delving into the unknown. My name is Corinne Tan, and I hail from a small town in the countryside. Growing up, I was always drawn to the stories my Lola, grandmother, used to tell me around the dinner table. The way her eyes would sparkle as she spoke of the spirits that roamed our ancestral lands, the way her voice took on a hushed tone as she recounted the legends of the past. It all seemed like mere fantasy to me back then. But as I delved deeper into my studies, I began to realize that these stories weren't just mere myths. They were rooted in reality, passed down through generations of Filipinos who had witnessed the unexplainable firsthand. The threads of folklore and history wove together a tapestry of terror that seemed all too real. I settled into my life in Manila with ease, taking up residence in a small apartment in one of the city's oldest neighborhoods. The crumbling facades and narrow alleys seemed to whisper secrets of their own as I explored every nook and cranny. It was as if the city itself was alive, watching me with an unblinking gaze. The days blurred together as I immersed myself in my research. I spent long hours poring over dusty tomes at the university library, speaking with elderly residents who shared their own tales of horror, and exploring the city's hidden corners, searching for signs of the supernatural. And then it started. Strange occurrences that would change everything. It was on a drizzly afternoon, as I was exploring the winding streets of Poblacion, that I stumbled upon a figure who would change everything. I had been walking for hours, my feet aching from the constant pounding of raindrops against the pavement. The smell of wet earth and decaying leaves filled the air, making me feel like I was wading through a soggy graveyard. As I turned a corner, I noticed a woman standing under the awning of an old church. Her eyes seemed to be fixed on something in the distance, her gaze so intense that it made my skin prickle with unease. At first, I thought she was just lost or waiting for someone, but as I drew closer, I realized she wasn't looking at anything at all. She was staring straight into nothingness, her face a map of lines and creases etched by time and sorrow. Her hair was a wild tangle of black locks, and her skin had the pallor of one who'd spent too many nights under the stars. As I approached, she didn't flinch or acknowledge my presence. It was as if she was oblivious to everything except the void that seemed to be pulling her in. I felt a shiver run down my spine as our eyes met for a brief moment, and then she vanished into thin air. I was left standing there, drenched and bewildered, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But when I looked around, I saw that the church had grown taller, its stone walls seeming to loom over me like sentinels guarding a long-forgotten secret. The rain slowed to a gentle patter, and an unsettling calm settled over the streets. It was then that I realized this woman was no ordinary mortal. She was something more, something ancient and otherworldly, and our encounter had left me with more questions than answers. I couldn't shake off the feeling that the mysterious woman was still watching me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing in front of me, her eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond our world. It was as if she was waiting for something or someone. The next few days were a blur of strange occurrences that hinted at the presence of ghostly apparitions. I would catch glimpses of figures out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find no one there. Doors creaked open by themselves, and the sound of whispers seemed to follow me wherever I went. It was as if the city itself was trying to tell me something, but in a language I couldn't understand. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The more I investigated these strange events, the more I became convinced that the mysterious woman was somehow connected to them. She seemed to be the catalyst, the spark that set off a chain reaction of supernatural occurrences. I started to notice patterns. Every time I saw her apparition, it was accompanied by a similar event. A door would open and she would appear. A window would shatter and she would materialize out of thin air. It was as if she was trying to communicate with me, but in a way that defied logic. The more I tried to ignore her, the more she seemed to haunt me. And then, one night, I saw her standing in front of my apartment building, her eyes fixed on mine. This time, I didn't just see her, I felt her presence. It was as if she was reaching out to touch me, to draw me into some dark and ancient world that lurked beyond the veil of reality. And when I looked away, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being pulled into a world beyond my own. The more I delved into the Tagalog horror stories, the more I became entangled in their dark web of superstition and myth. My apartment began to feel like a prison, as if the walls were closing in on me with every passing day. I couldn't concentrate on my research, my mind consumed by visions of Aswang and Tikbalang, of Diwata and evil-Ibigan spirits that haunted the rural landscapes of our country. The rain seemed to grow heavier, drumming against the pavement like a rhythmic chant from beyond the grave. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of darkness, with no lifeline to cling to. My friends and family grew concerned, but I couldn't explain what was happening to me. I just knew that I had to keep digging, to uncover the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of our culture. The more I read, the more I became convinced that the world of Tagalog horror stories was real, and it was calling to me. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read about the rituals and sacrifices that were said to summon these malevolent spirits. It was as if I was being drawn into their dark world, a world where the living were mere prey for the gods of death and destruction. And yet, I couldn't look away. I was addicted to the fear, the thrill of the unknown that coursed through my veins like liquid fire. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. I was descending into darkness, and there was no turning back. As I delved deeper into the world of Tagalog horror stories, I stumbled upon a mystery that had been unsolved for decades. It was a tale of lost souls and haunted places, of spirits trapped between worlds and unable to move on. The more I read, the more I became convinced that these lost souls were real, and they were calling to me. I felt a sense of purpose that I had never felt before, as if I was being drawn into a world where the living could make a difference. I began to investigate, talking to people who claimed to have seen or experienced the presence of these lost souls. They spoke of eerie landscapes, of abandoned places and forgotten towns, where the veil between worlds was thin. I traveled to these places, feeling the weight of history and tragedy in every step. I met with mediums and psychics who told me that I had a special gift, the ability to communicate with the dead, and so I began to listen. I heard the whispers of the lost souls, their pleas for help and their stories of woe. I felt their pain and their fear as they struggled to move on from this world, and I knew that I was being asked to help them. But who were these lost souls? What had happened to them? And how could I possibly help them find peace? The more I learned, the more I became convinced that the answer lay in an ancient ritual, one that had been used by our ancestors to guide spirits back to the afterlife. It was a ritual of great power and great danger, one that required great courage and determination. And so, I decided to try it, to see if I could use my gift to help these lost souls find peace. But as I began to prepare for the ritual, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched, that something was waiting for me in the shadows, something that didn't want me to succeed. And then, one night, I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the edge of town, its eyes fixed on mine with an unspeakable hunger. As I stood alone in the darkness, I began to hear whispers. At first they were just faint murmurs, but soon they grew louder and more distinct. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakable, a soft, raspy voice that seemed to be coming from all around me. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that I was not alone in the night. Someone or something was speaking to me, their breath cold against my skin. The whispers grew more urgent, the words beginning to take shape. "Find the door," they whispered. "Open it." The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, echoing off the walls of my mind. I felt a surge of fear mixed with curiosity. What door were they talking about, and why did I need to find it? But as I listened, the whispers grew more insistent, more persuasive. "Find the door," they repeated, until I felt like I was drowning in their words. Suddenly, the wind picked up and a gust of air swept past me, extinguishing the lantern that had been my only light. The darkness seemed to deepen, and I knew that I was on my own. But still, the whispers continued, echoing through my mind like a mantra. "Find the door." And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the whispers stopped. The silence was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for whatever would come next. As I stepped into the narrow alleys of Manila, I felt a chill run down my spine. The city was alive with energy, but there were places that seemed to hold secrets and stories that were better left unspoken. I had always been drawn to the unknown, the unseen, and the unsaid. And now, I was on a mission to uncover the dark secrets and hidden histories of these haunted alleys. The streets were lined with old buildings, their wooden facades worn and weathered from years of rain and wind. The air was thick with the scent of incense and smoke, carried on the breeze from the nearby markets. I felt like I was walking through a time warp, as if the past was trying to reach out and touch me. I began my journey in the historic walled city of Intramuros, where the Spanish colonizers had built their grand palaces and churches. The alleys were narrow and winding, with buildings that seemed to lean in on each other like old friends. I walked for hours, taking in the sights and sounds of the place, until I came across a small, unassuming door hidden behind a tapestry of vines. The door was old and worn, with intricate carvings of Filipino gods and goddesses etched into its surface. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years, but something about it drew me in. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I reached out to touch the door handle, feeling a sudden jolt of electricity. As I pushed open the door, I was met with a musty smell and a faint glow emanating from within. The air inside was thick with dust, but I could make out the outlines of old furniture and artifacts that seemed to hold secrets of their own. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. What I found there would change me forever. It was a hidden chamber, filled with ancient relics and forbidden knowledge. I felt like I had stumbled into a different world, one where the laws of reality no longer applied. And at the center of it all, I saw a figure, a woman in white, her eyes black as coal. She reached out to me, her hand cold and bony, and whispered a single word, "Welcome." And with that, everything went black. As I continued my investigation, I began to encounter entities that seemed too real to be mere figments of my imagination. They would appear out of nowhere, their presence marked by an unsettling feeling that left me breathless. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but soon, I realized that these encounters were all too real. One night, I was walking through a deserted alleyway when I saw a figure in the distance. As I approached, it became clear that it was a woman with long, flowing hair and a white dress that seemed to glow in the dark. She didn't seem to notice me at first, but as I drew closer, she turned to face me. Her eyes were black as coal, and they seemed to bore into my soul. I felt a chill run down my spine as she spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" she asked, her words sending shivers down my spine. I tried to explain that I was just an investigator, but she cut me off. "I know what you're looking for," she said, her eyes glinting with a malevolent light, "and I'll give it to you." She reached out and touched my face, and suddenly I was flooded with visions of the past. I saw old buildings, crumbling streets, and people who had lived and died in this very alleyway. But as quickly as the visions came, they disappeared, leaving me feeling shaken and confused. I tried to leave, but she blocked my way. "You can't go," she said, her voice firm. "Not yet." And with that, she vanished into thin air. I was left standing there, wondering if I had really seen her or if it was all just a product of my imagination. But as I looked down at my hands, I saw that they were shaking, and I knew that what I had experienced was all too real. From that day on, I began to realize that the line between reality and fantasy was thinning. The entities I encountered seemed more and more real with each passing day, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into a world that was beyond my control. I tried to continue my investigation, but it was getting harder. The encounters were becoming more frequent, and they were all too intense. I felt like I was losing myself in this world, and I didn't know how to stop. And then, one night, I received a message that made my blood run cold. "You'll never leave this place," it said. I knew then that I had to get out, but I was trapped. The entities had me in their grip, and I couldn't escape. As I stood there, frozen with fear, I realized that I had become a part of something much bigger than myself, something that would consume me whole if I didn't find a way to break free. As I delved deeper into the world of supernatural phenomena, I began to notice a pattern. Certain objects and symbols seemed to be connected to the eerie encounters that had been plaguing me. At first, it was just a hunch, but as I dug deeper, I discovered a dark history behind these seemingly innocuous items. A small, ornate box with a strange symbol etched onto its lid seemed to be at the center of it all. It was said that this box had once belonged to a powerful sorcerer who had used it to summon entities from beyond the veil. The symbol on the lid was said to be a key to unlocking the box's secrets, but I knew better than to try and open it. Next, I stumbled upon an ancient tome bound in black leather. The cover was adorned with strange symbols that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. As I flipped through its yellowed pages, I discovered that this book was a grimoire, a collection of spells and incantations used by the sorcerer who owned the box. But it wasn't just objects and symbols that held secrets. I also encountered strange symbols etched into walls, furniture, and even people's bodies. These symbols seemed to be a form of communication between entities from different realms, and they were often used to convey dark and sinister messages. One such symbol was the Eye of the Beholder. It was said that this symbol could only be seen by those who had been chosen for a specific purpose. I saw it etched into the wall of an abandoned church, and as I looked closer, I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, the air around me seemed to shift and ripple, and I knew that I was being watched. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it only grew stronger as I delved deeper into the world of cursed objects and symbols. I began to realize that some secrets were better left unspoken, and that the line between reality and the supernatural was thinner than I had ever imagined. As I continued my investigation, I discovered more and more examples of cursed objects and symbols. There was the Hand of Fate, a small, intricately carved box said to grant wishes, but at a terrible cost. And there was the Sword of Shadows, a blade said to be able to cut through anything, but only for those who wielded it with the purest of intentions. But with each new discovery, I felt myself becoming more and more entangled in this world of supernatural phenomena. I knew that I had to be careful, for I was playing with forces beyond my control. And yet, I couldn't help but feel drawn to these cursed objects and symbols. There was something about them that seemed to call to me, like a siren's song. And as I delved deeper into the mystery, I knew that I would have to face the consequences of my actions. For in this world, the line between good and evil was blurred, and the only constant was chaos, and I was about to become a part of it. As I delved deeper into the world of supernatural phenomena, I realized that I had to find answers. But every lead seemed to end in a dead end, and every clue led me further down the rabbit hole. I was desperate to uncover the truth, but the more I searched, the more I felt like I was losing myself. The symbols, the objects, the entities, everything seemed to be connected, but I couldn't quite see the thread. I had to keep searching, no matter how deep I went. But as I followed the clues, I began to feel like I was walking into a trap. Every step felt like a betrayal, every discovery felt like a lie. I knew that I had to keep going, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded towards some unknown fate. And then, one night, I received a message that made my blood run cold. "Meet me at the old clock tower at midnight," it said. "Come alone." I knew that I shouldn't go, but I felt like I had to. It was as if the universe was pushing me towards some revelation, no matter how terrifying it might be. As I approached the clock tower, I could feel a sense of unease building inside me. What would I find there? Would I finally get my answers, or would I succumb to the darkness that seemed to surround me at every turn? I took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown. The clock tower loomed above me, its face twisted into a macabre grin. I felt like I was being pulled towards it, like some unseen force was drawing me closer. And then, as I reached out to touch the clock's surface, everything went black. I fell through a void of darkness, and when I came to, I found myself in a room filled with mirrors. Every reflection stared back at me, but none of them were mine. They were all strangers, their faces twisted into grotesque grins. And then I saw it, the answer I had been searching for all along. A message scrawled across the wall, written in blood. "You should not have come here," it said. "Now you'll never leave." As the realization hit me like a ton of bricks, the mirrors began to shatter, one by one, and I knew that I was trapped, forever bound to this place of horrors. The search for answers had led me down a path from which there was no return. As I stood before the mirror, its shards scattered around me like a ghastly confetti, I felt an icy presence closing in. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and death. And then I saw them, the faces of the dead, their eyes black as coal, their skin gray as stone. They began to whisper my name over and over until my ears rang with the sound. I tried to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The faces drew closer, their mouths twisted into macabre grins. I could feel their breath on my skin, cold and rank. And then a hand reached out from the darkness, grasping mine like a vice. I was pulled towards it, forced to confront the abyss that stared back at me. The face of the dead loomed before me, its features twisted into a snarl. "Why have you come here?" it growled, its voice like thunder in my mind. I tried to speak, but my voice was caught in my throat. The face leaned closer, its breath hot against my skin. "You want answers," it hissed. "But are you prepared to pay the price?" I knew then that I had to make a choice, to surrender to the darkness or to cling to the faint light of life. But as I looked into the face of death, I saw something that made my heart freeze, a glimmer of recognition. The face was mine, yet it was not. It was a mirror image, a doppelganger, a shadow self. And in that moment, I knew that I had to choose between two versions of myself, the one who lived and the one who died. The face of death laughed at me, its voice like the crackling of flames. "You have no choice," it said. "You are both. You are life and death, intertwined like the threads of a rope, and now you must choose which end to hold." I felt the weight of that choice crushing me, like a boulder dropped from the sky. But as I looked into the face of death, I knew that I had to make it. I had to choose. As I stood before the face of death, the world around me began to dissolve like a painting in the rain. The mirror shattered, its shards falling like 1,000 tiny knives. The faces of the dead disappeared, leaving only an endless void. And then I heard it, the sound of whispers, a chilling susurration that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Manila's forgotten corners," they whispered, their voices like a cold wind. I tried to run, but my feet were stuck in place. The whispers grew louder until I could make out individual words. "You'll never escape. The night will consume you. You're mine now." And then the darkness coalesced around me, taking shape as twisted, gnarled trees that seemed to stretch up to the sky like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot, and I could feel the weight of centuries of sorrow bearing down upon me. I tried to scream, but my voice was drowned out by the whispers. The trees began to move, their branches tangling around me like a living noose. I felt myself being pulled towards them, drawn into a vortex of darkness that seemed to have no end. And then I saw it, the forgotten corner of Manila, a place where time had stood still for decades. The streets were empty and still, the buildings crumbling and overgrown with vines. But as I walked through the streets, I knew that I was not alone. The whispers followed me, echoing off the walls. And then I saw them, the ghosts of Manila's forgotten corners, their eyes black as coal, their skin gray as stone. They moved around me, their faces twisted into macabre grins. "Welcome to our home," they said, their voices like a cold wind. "You'll never leave." The night wore on, an endless, unending nightmare that seemed to have no end. I was trapped in this place, tormented by the ghosts of Manila's forgotten corners. And as the hours ticked by, I knew that I would never escape. The darkness closed in around me, a living, breathing entity that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. And then, everything went black.